Welcome back to the second of my two KPI videos. If you're looking for service-related metrics or project-related metrics, this video is for you, so stay tuned. My name is Adam Hanneman. Welcome to Ramblings of a Geek. I've been in the MSP space for the better part of a couple decades, and I've done a lot of work with metrics over my tenure, and I want to kind of share some of my recommendations for you all, especially as it relates to service metrics. This is an area where I see a lot of MSPs struggle when they're trying to figure out things, right? They're looking at raw tickets and those kinds of things. So we're going to cover a couple different metrics today. One of the core concepts around metrics that I want to touch on real quick is you want to visualize the data as much as you possibly can. Looking at big tables of metrics is a whole lot like trying to look through the matrix to see what's going on. And so make graphs, find a way to color code the numbers. If number is greater than this, it's green. If it's less than that, it's red, those kind of things. Make the visualization allow you to pick out where the problem areas are and where the good areas are, so you can minimize the problem areas and maximize the good stuff, right? So make your data visually appealing. So let's jump right into service metrics. Service metrics are really important to get dialed in. And if you remember in my previous video, things like tracking the raw ticket data as it relates to open tickets only tells you part of the story. So it's really important that you do more than just track that. So what should you track then, right? So let's talk about some ratios that I think are really important. Let's start with tickets and time per endpoint and time per ticket. I think these three ratios are the core of what you want to spend your time on as it relates to the service metrics. So let's start with tickets per endpoint, right? It's just the raw number of tickets divided by the raw number of endpoints that you support. And you could do this on a per client basis or in aggregate. And I like to actually do the aggregate number and then the client number so you can see whether this particular client is in line or out of line with your overall numbers anyway. Let's say you want to do a 6-month average of tickets per endpoint. What you would do then is you would take your total number of tickets for that 6 months, you take the total number of endpoints for those 6 months, and you might need to do a little bit of an average there, or maybe you just take the ending number depending on how much you've grown over that 6 months. And then you divide that by number of months, right? So you do the tickets divided by endpoints divided by the number of months, and that gives you kind of a decent average as far as what that looks like. And that way, you're not taking 1 month, which might be real busy, or not busy at all, right? So you can eliminate some of the outliers that way. Now, time per endpoint is very similar, right? You take your total time spent, and this is build human time probably. I'm not sure I would use your RMM time for this, divided by total number of endpoints, and that gets you your time per endpoint, right? If you can figure those two things out, I think you're in a pretty good spot. A related metric, which also isn't bad, is time per ticket. So if you understand your time per ticket, that's another really important one. So that's your total number of hours spent on human hours divided by the number of tickets that time comprised, and that gets you your time per ticket as well. And having these three ratios really dialed in, I think is really important. The next metric I like to look at from a service side of the world is kill rate. Now, kill rate tells you pretty much how you're doing on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis as it relates to the literal tickets that are open versus the literal tickets that are closed. Now, there's a couple different ways of looking at kill rate, and I'll cover them both. I think they have their place. The first one is the kill rate number is the total number of tickets opened minus the total number of tickets closed. You are looking for a negative number here. -1 means you close one more ticket than has been opened in that period. I really like using kill rate number on a weekly and daily metrics on dashboards for my help desk, because it really told them how far ahead or behind they may have been for the week as it relates to raw tickets. Now, I know that ticket A and ticket B are not created equal, but it gives you a pretty good idea as to kind of how the work is flowing through the queues. If you see a high positive kill rate on that regard, you want to really dig in, you want to figure out what's going on. Maybe you just had a flurry of tickets, or there's some big outage or something, or you're short-staffed, or something is going on that needs some additional help with, right? So that's your kill rate number. So then you have kill rate ratio. Kill rate ratio is total tickets closed divided by total tickets opened. Now on this one, you're looking for a number greater than 1. Greater than 1 means you've closed more tickets than have been opened, and that's good. Anything less than 1 means that you've closed fewer tickets than that. And the reality is, again, if you're at 0.99, maybe not that big of a deal, but if you're at 0.7, probably a problem, right? So it tells you really kind of what's going on as it relates to the work coming in and out of your ticket system. So then let's shift over to the project side of the world for a minute, because I think that's an important piece. And it's also sort of neglected when folks are talking about metrics anyway. So there's a couple things I would take a look at individually, and then I'll get to the aggregate numbers here in a minute. So individually, I would really want to track your project progress. Those are projects that are in flight, currently being worked on, and where those projects are from a budgeted hours to actual hours, right? If your budgeted hours is 20 and your actual is 18 and you still have like 10 hours to go, that's a problem. If your budget is 20 and your actual is 18 and your forecasted finished thing is 19, you're doing great, right? So there's things to pay attention to there. So it's budgeted versus actual versus kind of how much is really left, and that's going to be the first thing I would be paying attention to. And then once you close a project, you want to pay attention to budget versus actual as things have been closed, right? And this is important because if you are consistently over or under budgeting projects, that's going to lead you to some challenges. And frankly, when I was leading a project team, that was one of our biggest challenges, was that we had a habit of under budgeting things because we wanted to be aggressive with the pricing and all those kinds of things, which sometimes could lead you to a bad spot. Make sure you're analyzing your projects after you close them with some sort of a post-mortem. And this is a post-mortem basically says, did we get the projects done on time? How did we do against the budget? What were the client's feedback on the project, and what's the text feedback on the project, right? It's kind of trying to understand how each project went. I think that's a really important thing, no matter the size of MSP. So if you're doing one project a month, make sure you're doing that postmortem. If you're doing 10 projects a month, do that postmortem. It's going to take you more time, but it's really important time to learn from the process as you build it, as you move down the path. And as you do the analysis to understand how your projects are going, you upgrade the processes that go behind it, right? If you are consistently underbidding projects because of whatever reason, fix that. If you're overbidding projects, you might want to fix that as well. If you are giving too aggressive of timelines, fix it, right? Understand what's going on. Understand what your team can actually get done in any given day, week, or month, and make sure that you are like using the realities to inform the project planning. So then let's take a look at some of the bigger zoomed out numbers. And the first one that I want to talk about is project gross margin. I talked about last week in the first metrics video where I talked a lot more about finances, but your project gross margin is important, especially if you have dedicated project engineers. So project gross margin is that project revenue, subtract out your project COGS, and that's typically your engineer spend plus any tools that you use to get a project done. Divide that number by the project revenue and multiply by 100. And it's going to give you a percent. Now, you should be aiming at the higher side of 40 if you can. So 40 to 50 would be ideal. 45 to 50 is probably a little better. But if you're able to hit that, I think you're doing pretty good. So that's project gross margin. The second piece is the total number of projects in flight versus their budget versus how much time is actually left. Look at that as an aggregate. Just pay attention to that bigger number so that way you know what's going on under the hood a little bit. That's important to understand the overall project team. Now, if you have one project engineer or maybe two, this is going to be a little bit easier to track. If you've got 5 or 6, that's going to be a little bit harder to track. But it's important that you're paying attention to that, both on a per project basis, but also on that aggregate basis as well. Because if you're seeing a lot of projects being off track as it relates to the budgeting while they're in flight, there's some need to dig in to figure out what's going on to see if you can solve some of those problems while those projects are still in flight. So you're not going to end up with a whole bunch of projects in your postmortems that look bad. The third thing I would pay attention to here is your project pipeline. The project pipeline metric is important to understand because you want to make sure you keep your project team busy. Oftentimes, your project engineers are your most expensive engineers anyway, so you want to make sure that they're billing time against things that are going to bring more and more profit to your business. So you want to make sure you have enough project work coming up for them to work. So what I would recommend that you do is pay attention to how much work they're able to get done in any given week or month and understand what their average billables are from a project perspective. And then once you understand what those dollar figures look like, let's just say it's $10,000 or $15,000 in a month, then you need to make sure you've got $10,000 or $15,000 a month in pipeline ready for them once they wrap up their projects. Now, when you do this across the team with multiple project engineers, it just scales up accordingly. So if you've got 3 or 4 project engineers, you're going to need somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 of projects sitting out there, backfill for when those employees wrap up their projects. I think if you're paying attention to some of these individual numbers and the aggregate numbers, you are in a pretty good spot. So that's projects metrics in a nutshell. Now, with all of that, we've covered a bunch of different service metrics. We've covered a number of project metrics. Last week, we covered a bunch of financial metrics. I think you're off and ready to run with getting a good scorecard put together. So put your scorecard together, pay attention to it, manage to it, move the numbers in the right direction, and grow your business. With all of that, thanks for coming on this ramble with me, and hope to see you on the next one.